Okay, so today I'm in Wiltshire with Richard Farquhar. Thanks very much for giving us some time today, Richard, and inviting me to your lovely house here. So just to the premise here, you're a trustee of Racing Welfare, Iggy's Fund, and a 792nd Point of Life award winner. Famous within racing for walking the courses, raised last time I looked £500,000 by not only walking around the courses but to each of them. So there's fair achievements there. But before we talk about them in depth later, can we go back to your sort of how did you get into this game?
I suppose primarily through my father, who was a massive fan of the sport. As a young man, he worked in racing. After he left school, he went to work as a stable lad in Newmarket for 6 months. Then had to go off and do national service, which he did for the Green Jackets in what is now the UAE. And after he came back, he went to work at Sledmere in Yorkshire for a few months preparing yearlings for the sales. Moved down to Woodland Stud in Newmarket, where at that time it seems almost unbelievable that they had a stallion roster then which comprised of Elizabeth, who I think was the last horse to do the treble of the Doncaster Cup, the Goodwood Cup and the Ascot Gold Cup in the same year, which Stradivarius then repeated. Never Say Die, who won the 1954 Derby, Hyperion, who won the 1933 Derby, and Rebo had just arrived there. So it was most incredible. He had an amazing season there, and then went to Plantation Stud, where he, during the covering season and foaling season, he foaled St Paddy, who won the 1960 Derby. He was the second horse he ever foaled. He just loved the sport, and I got the bug from him.
So, your dad was involved in owning horses in syndicates?
Yeah, in a very small way. He had 5 children and was kind enough and generous spirited enough to send us all to decent schools and virtually bankrupt himself in the process. So he was never a punter. He was a very, very small time owner in syndicates. He had horses, actually mostly with Hugh Collingridge in Newmarket, who he got on very well with. And yeah, he loved the sport, but it was primarily as just a massive fan of watching it. He was never a punter. I think the biggest bet he'd ever had would be he'd have a 5-row race during Ascot and Cheltenham, which he used to sit on the sofa at home and watch on the telly.
And you say syndicates, that would have been fairly rare back in those days, wasn't it?
Well, no, he didn't get involved in syndicates really until I suppose the 1990s, I guess. His first involvement with a syndicate per se was a breeding syndicate in 1958. He was very pally with a guy called Frank Chapman, who went on to become the Fustocks racing manager, who he worked with at Sledmere. And Frank managed to secure him a job taking a horse called Pipe of Peace, who had been third in Crepello's Derby and Guineas in 1957. He was syndicated to stand in Australia as a stallion. And my father took him on the boat, 6-week passage to Australia, stayed with him through his first season covering mares down there, and then came back. So I guess that was his first sort of introduction to syndicates. But Pipe of Peace was one of the very earliest horses to effectively move from Northern Hemisphere to Southern Hemisphere. So he went with him.
Okay, now it was interesting that you said that your father nearly bankrupted himself sending you to a nice school, because obviously we've talked prior to this, so I know that you went to a nice school and you then got into university.
I did. I got in more, I have to say, due to my ability to play cricket than because of my academic abilities. I was fortunate enough to play in the Eton Harrow match at Lord's, which was a game that was always watched by the guy who effectively scouted young players for Northamptonshire. And so I went off, he saw me play in that game. I went off and had a county trial, and that kind of got picked up by Exeter University. So I got in to Exeter to read languages with grades that really weren't anywhere near good enough. And I didn't particularly want to go. I mean, I had a complete blast down there, but it didn't really work out.
Didn't work out. You were thrown out.
I had too much fun. Yeah, I had much too much fun.
So what was the? Why did they give you the heave ho from there?
Well, I think perhaps it could be best summarised by my best man at our wedding said that my university career could be summed up in one sentence, which was that I visited the library once and I still have the book, which probably is about true.
No, understandably, as your dad, sacrificed a lot to give you a good education, he wasn't too chuffed.
He was livid. I mean, I have to say, at that point, we didn't have a very good relationship because my parents split up when I was, I suppose, 8 or 9. I lived with my mother. I didn't see very much of my father. He had relatively limited access. And to be honest, most of the time when I did hear from him, it was either because I'd had a lousy school report, or I hadn't sent someone a thank you letter, or I hadn't replied to something, so we didn't have a particularly good relationship. But looking back on it, there are many aspects of me getting chucked out of Exeter rather prematurely that were unbelievably beneficial. And the number one on that list was unquestionably that I turned up on my father's doorstep in Chiswick, and we were almost sort of thrown together, and we built the most incredibly close relationship. I mean, a day would not pass when we didn't speak for the last 20 years of his life. That was a massive benefit. As I have to say, was the fact that I then got a job, first job I ever got, working for Ladbrokes for 3.5 years, which was just such fun, such a wonderful experience, and taught me, frankly, 1,000 times more than a degree in French and German would have taught me from Exeter University.
Right, so you came back with your tail between your legs from Exeter to your father.
Yeah.
And was he to do with you getting the job with Ladbrokes?
Well, he'd said in no uncertain terms that he expected me to get off my arse and get out there and get a job quickly. He didn't particularly care what it was. He just wanted me to get out there and try and make the most of a difficult situation that I had made for myself. And so, I mean, it was crazy. Every day he'd get back from work and he'd sit me down and say, right, what have you done today to try and get a job? Who have you rung? Show me the adverts you've rung. What interviews have you set up? Anyway, in the end, there was a Ladbrokes betting shop in the High Street in Chiswick. And I thought, I loved racing by that stage. And I thought, well, I'm sure I could get a job in a betting shop. So, I walked into the Ladbrokes shop in Chiswick High Road, which was nowadays run by a guy called Paul Austin, who worked in the business for a long time. And I got a job. I started working 25 hours a week, sitting behind the till of a betting shop in Acton High Street. And I absolutely loved it. And I worked for them for 3.5 years. I was a board marker, I was a cashier, I was a settler. I always loved it. I quite liked the sort of mental arithmetic stuff, going off and learning how to settle bets. And I still remember 13 to 8 on is 1.615384. I still remember that 7 to 4 on is 1.571428. All that sort of stuff. It was a blast. It was an absolute blast. And I made some great mates who I still see. We have a WhatsApp group, and we go racing together to what we still call SGB Day at Ascot just before Christmas. And it was brilliant.
Now, can we just rewind a bit? You mentioned the two very nice schools that competed at the cricket with each other. Which one did you go to?
I was at Eton.
You were at Eton. I've spoken to other ex-Eton, but quite often they've turned out to be the school bookie, or they've climbed the wall to get to the betting shop. Was that you as well?
I would say I definitely wasn't the bookie, but there was a guy. I did economics as an A level, and one of the guys in my class would make prices of his own back on a Saturday morning on a couple of the races on a Saturday afternoon, and so I used to quite enjoy trying to take his eyes out. The guy there was a Evening Standard salesman who sat outside the school bookshop, who was a mine of interesting information. Quite a lot of it would probably come from fellow Etonians, and we used to sort of sneak off into Windsor and go into the Ladbrokes shop in Pescott Street, and in those days I think they were rather more relaxed in betting shops about people under the age of 18 coming in having a bet. So it was. I was kind of into it by then, but I've never ever really been a punter, but very much from an interest point of view. And I guess it was at Eton that, the day that really completely cemented my love of this sport. I was asked by a guy in my house to go to the Derby in 1979 when Troy won with his parents, who I think they were involved in the sponsorship of the race that year. And I can still see it, in a box on the top of the Queen's Stand, seeing Troy come down round Tattenham Corner and into the straight. And it was just absolutely mind-blowing, beautiful day. And that was really the day that I thought, this is just fantastic. I really, really love this. So that was the day.
So having been schooled at Eton and then gone to university, albeit briefly, you'd be sort of looked at these days as being a bit overqualified to be a betting shop manager. So which you were doing by the time you were 21. So was it in your subconsciously or consciously, was that a way of getting involved with racing?
Well, it was because I hadn't been brought up with horses directly. I'd never ridden. The idea of going into training or breeding or sales there was no way in that I could see, but a way in which I could be involved was working for Ladbrokes, and it was brilliant. I met some incredible people doing it. When I worked in the shop in Notting Hill Gate, the artist Lucien Freud was a reasonably frequent visitor to the shop, and he'd come in with a satchel stuffed with cash and bet out of it for the afternoon. And he was a prodigious punter. I remember him coming in and asking for a prize after Goritus won that alleged wonder horse, won that 2-year-old race at Goodwood, whose name I've forgotten. He came in and asked for a prize on Goritus to win the 2,000 guineas and a derby the following year. And I said, of course, I'll ring the office. How much are you looking to have on, sir? And he said, well, I'd like a £10,000 double. This was 1983, I guess. I remember him, he won about 60 grand off us during Cheltenham one year. I remember he got a £120 combination tricast up on the county hurdle. He was a prodigious punter, an incredibly nice man, fascinating man. It was a great time. And
then you went to a betting shop in Hackney.
I did.
That must have been.
I did.
A culture shop.
Yeah, I ran a shop in the East End on the junction of Commercial Road and East India Dock Road for about 18 months, which was fantastic, great experience. I really loved it. It was the most battered, beaten up old shop. It didn't have any central heating. It had one storage heater, and quite often that wouldn't work. And you'd come in the morning, and there'd be, in the middle of winter, there'd be ice on the inside of the windows and growing off the bandit screen in front of the tills. And I had a brilliant 18 months or so there. And then this slot came up to run a shop in Sandringham Road in Hackney, which is now quite relatively gentrified. But in those days, it was the sort of northeast London equivalent of Railton Road in Brixton or All Saints Road in Ladbroke Grove. It was if you wanted to buy a bag of grass, that was where you went. And all the punters in the shop were Rastafarians. Most of them were punting out of money they'd made out of selling drugs. The police were completely aware of what was going on. There was a good deal more business going on actually in the shop than there was coming over the counter. People dealing drugs. And in those days, you weren't allowed, betting shops didn't have air conditioning. They weren't allowed to have the door open. They were treated in very much the same way as sex shops. You couldn't see into a betting shop. So the door was closed all day. Quite often I'd come out of that shop at the end of the day, particularly with night racing, slightly woozy from the impact of the noxious substances being imbibed by the punters. But it was great fun.